Well, friends, welcome back. It is Friday. It is October 20th, and we're delighted that if you're still joining us, we're not really sure why, but we're grateful that you do. We spent 2 days kind of talking about the history of the people called Israel. The Jewish state that we now have called Israel has a long and complicated history. And Steve, you correctly referenced yesterday, get more into it today. There was a monumental event around Constantine, Emperor Constantine, in the 300s.
So let's think about, again, we talked about the diaspora of the Jewish people. There are still, not everybody, I mean, it's not everybody left, but there were, so what you had in the land of what soon becomes known as Palestine is you had small bands of Jewish people, you had small bands of Palestinians, and you had the remnants of what used to be. Well, as Christianity spread, so does Judaism. They kind of go hand in hand. And we can't forget that almost exclusively the earliest Christians were Jewish.
Because the Jews had spread out all over the Mediterranean basin, that's where Paul often went
and
first.
that's that was Paul's network. That's where Paul would go from synagogue to synagogue, because he could find hospitality usually until he started preaching, then they kicked him out. But so just fast forward, you're talking most of the New Testament is written by 100, 125 at the latest. So it begins to be formulated, the church grows, the church becomes a threat to the Romans persecute the church, but eventually around the year 300 or so, Constantine, who's the emperor of Rome, converts to Christianity. This is important for the land of Israel, because one of the things that happens is Constantine's mother wants to go see all the places that are in the Bible. She wants to go find where Jesus was crucified. She wants to go identify where Jesus was born and all the holy sites. So she takes an expedition, and by all accounts, most archaeologists say she did a pretty good job of identifying the spots. So if you go to Israel on a trip and you go visit these spots, well, she was the one who actually identified the spots, which this then creates in the Christian mind an importance for the land of Israel, because people begin pilgrimages, right? So Christians begin to make pilgrimages to see where was Jesus born, where was he crucified, where was he resurrected, and that becomes a big thing to do. It becomes a way to express your faith. It becomes a way to venerate, the land.
And then the rise of Islam in the 600 years AD.
So that's Muhammad receives his revelation in the way Islam tells it from Allah, and writes the Quran, and that begins the rise of Islam. And part of the Quran states one of the holy sites for the Quran outside of Mecca, and there's at Medina, is the mount where, guess what? The temple happens to be built.
Where the Dome of the Rock is I think about the third most holy site in Islam.
And the idea is that's where Muhammad ascended into heaven. Mm-hmm. And so you've got the site of the temple, and the reason it's holy to them is that's Abraham's mountain, right? And the Jews think of that as the place where Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac.
And yet Islam says that was
the site that
Ishmael. It's going to be the site that was Ishmael.
And then it's also supposed to be the site that Muhammad ascends, right? I think that's right.
Yeah.
You can fact check me, let Paul know. But so you get this, so you start getting two major players, really three. You have the Jews who venerate the site because they believe if the temple can be rebuilt, then the Messiah will come. You have Christians who venerate the site because, it's the land of Jesus. And then you have the Arab people, you have the people of Islam who follow Islam, venerate it because, it's their holy land of Muhammad. And so you start to get this real push to control it.
And the Crusades happen and all sorts of bad stuff.
Crusades happen about around 1000 or a little before that, and they go for 300 years. And the idea then becomes, if you can go and defend the Holy Land and you become a Christian martyr, you get to the fast track to heaven, and it gets really complicated. Then
but,
through the
but what's the main point, and we got to finish this up today, is Islam, and they basically win that battle, and they control the territory that is we know today is Israel, from basically the 600-700s all the way through until the mid-1900s.
Well,
and in 1948, as a result of 6 million Jews being exterminated in and around concentration camps in Germany, the United Nations does this unthinkable thing, and they create a Jewish homeland called Israel in what was Palestinian territory.
Yeah, and that's kind of the 30,000 foot view, because there was a Zionist movement that was underway for several generations from Jews around the world who were hoping to return to their homeland. So
it had always been the longing, always been the desire.
Always been the desire, and there wasn't at the time a specific state that controlled it. There were people living there, so it gets really murky. But the long and short of it, Israel is established by UN Charter in 1948 as a political entity with boundaries and borders, and it's very small, smaller than it is today.
And you've got Jewish people, you've got Palestinian people, Palestinian Christians, Palestinian Muslims, all trying to navigate and live in this same land together.
And then you've got different, and we have to remember that Islam's not monolithic either. There are factions within Islam who believe differently, some of them hate each other more than they hate the Jewish people. You have Shia Muslims, you have Shiite Muslims, you have, for instance, Saudi Arabia and Iran are ancient and bitter enemies, and you've got Israel right in the middle of that. And so as you go through into the 1950s and 60s, the tensions rise. There's a big war in 1967 where Israel actually expands its territories, takes the West Bank,
the Golan Heights.
And then one of the struggles and disputes, as Israel had took that territory away from Jordan, then they've been populating the West Bank, and that's been a big rub, a big dispute. And then you get the development of the Gaza Strip, which is just got to be a tough place to live. There's 2 million people.
It's basically a refugee camp for those who were displaced. When Israel and people started moving in, they kicked the Palestinians out.
And so there were Palestinians who'd been on their land for several generations who one day were out there picking their olives, and the next day they're told you don't own this anymore. And so those kind of things have been rough. And for the Jews, they're saying, well, this is our land from the beginning. We just want to exist. And then, so you get groups that fight amongst each other. You get different ways and opinions even within the nation of Israel over how best to maintain security. And at this point, you've got a group called Hamas, which is they're very much more akin to ISIS than they are to any type of government. And they've instigated this really brutal attack. And now Israel's basic foreign policy, if you can call it that, is always to respond with such massive force that they'll never want to try that again. And it's a powder keg.
So having been there twice, and I know, Steve, we were there together, you literally feel the tension at every turn. You're always seeing armed Israeli soldiers. You're always seeing
cameras everywhere.
You're seeing walls. You're seeing graffiti on these walls that highlight the Palestinian
and it's shocking, especially when you live in when all you've been used to is the United States. To when we went into Bethlehem was one of the more. It was just hard because you drive through a military checkpoint through a huge wall, and you're screened, and then you go visit the place Jesus was born, and you know that the people who are there, the Palestinians who are there, can never leave.
Right. So Bethlehem is in Palestinian Authority territory.
And then you get people. You talk to regular Israelis who just want to live and thrive, and it's not. I don't know what the solution is. But what grappling with the tension in the Middle East has been true since chapter 12 of Genesis.
Yeah. So I think what we want to leave you with, what I'd like to leave you with, is an idea that this conflict is ancient. It goes all the way back. And we always get a little frightened when we start to hear about conflict in Israel. Is this the end of the world? Folks, we never know when the end of the world is.
Jesus makes that pretty clear.
Jesus makes that clear in his statements that wars and rumors of wars, all of this is going to happen. And yes, we want to pay attention to those things, but we don't want to fixate. What I think we're supposed to do and what Jesus calls us to do is always be ready to live every day as if this could be our last day. And every day can be our last day. To stay faithful, to be people of prayer, and to advocate for peace. I think we can absolutely trust that what Jesus would want for everyone in the area is for there to be a peace in which we can live together as one people under this idea that Abraham is our father. If nothing else, we see our shared humanity in that.
So within Scripture, there are certainly calls for that. The book of Micah points out, that there will be a day when they will take their swords and beat them into plowshares, and they will make war no more or practice war no more. Yeah. Psalm 122 reads, "Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. Peace be within your walls and security within your towers. For the sake of my relatives and friends, I will say, peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your good."
So today, please join us in praying for the peace of Jerusalem, praying for the peace of that land, that the children of Abraham can find common ground in love of God, love of each other.
It's a big ask, but we'll keep asking. I know God can do it.
Thank you for your time. We'll see you next week.